Necron Tomb World Terrain. But do I have enough for Warhammer 40k Terrain 8th edition?
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, in today's video I am going to do a follow-up after my showcase of all of my Necron Tomb World Terrain that I did in the last video. The question is, do I actually have enough terrain for 8th edition? 8th edition seems to be totally different to what we've had in the past when it comes to terrain. So I'm going to ask that question, have a chat about my terrain regarding 8th edition, and I'm going to reveal some of my terrain ideas for my future projects. So I hope you will stay and enjoy this video, and if you want to keep up to date with the wonders of Warhammer 40k, then please give me a sub and hit the bell button so you don't miss an upload. Okay, so last week I did a showcase video of all of my Necron terrain that I own. I put it all on my table. It was a struggle. I just about got it on the table and it filled the whole thing. It was chock-a-block with terrain. However, I'm still asking myself the question, do I have enough terrain for 8th edition? Because 8th edition has definitely changed things up regarding terrain on the table. Now I think my terrain situation was really highlighted to me in a game that I had against fellow YouTuber Aceface from the channel Twisted Dice, a great battle report channel, and if you love your battle reports you will really love that channel, so check it out, Twisted Dice. I will put a link in the description below. But anyway, yeah, Aceface came and we played a game. It was his Tau in the new codex against my new Necron codex. It was a great game, we had lots of fun. And we had a good amount of terrain on the table. Actually, I put down all of the terrain before Aceface came. I made it as aesthetically pleasing as I could and a decent amount of terrain. However, you could easily see that my terrain for that particular game just wasn't really good enough. Now you can see from the battle report I have a reasonable amount of terrain there, over 25%. Probably the board is actually around 50% covered with terrain. However, what I'm really lacking is some line of sight blocking terrain, and this was evident against his list, which by the way was before the beta rules, but he had 5 Riptides, and boy, they put out a lot of shots, and not having that line of sight blocking terrain really put the hurt on me. And it does seem like that 8th edition really does need line of sight blocking terrain. The cover saves for terrain just aren't as good as they used to be. Now most of my terrain is built around the old days, where primarily what you really wanted is pieces of cover just to sit your units in. Now they are still quite useful. However, buildings seem to be quite popular in 8th edition, especially with the levels rules, and of course line of sight blocking terrain, because regardless of what anyone says, 8th edition is still a shooting game. It's all about how much firepower, how much damage you can bring with your guns. And no line of sight blocking terrain at the start of a game, especially if you don't have first turn, can really hurt your army. So, although I have a lot of Necron terrain, I feel like I've got some big gaps in my terrain set. A lot of it is low level flat terrain, ideal for standing units in, but not ideal for line of sight blocking. I have quite a number of obelisks. Again, they look great on the table. They're good to manoeuvre your models around, but they're not great for line of sight blocking. I do have a few small buildings, however I feel like I need more. It seems like walls are quite popular in 8th edition, so I'm wondering if I should make some small Necron walls. Little pieces of terrain, scatter type terrain, which actually block line of sight. The problem that you have if you make a big building that blocks line of sight is it takes up quite a big area on the board. And I think that's why walls seem to be quite popular in 8th edition, because you can put them in smaller areas, they can go all around the board in between your main pieces of terrain and give you that great line of sight blocking ability. So what do you think about that idea of me adding some Necron walls to my terrain? Now, talking of adding to my terrain setup, what I want to talk about next is my future ideas for terrain. Okay, so that was a bit more of a serious chat about terrain in 8th edition and what I'm lacking and what I probably need to have. However, now I want to talk about the fun aspect of terrain, my ideas that I've got hidden away in here for my future projects, not because the rules predict that's what I need, but because I think it will make my board look even more epic. Okay, so my first idea actually involves a piece of terrain which I already have, and that is my corner acid pool. Now, I really enjoyed making this piece of terrain, and it was always designed to go into the corner of the table. However, I've got an idea of how I might like to expand this piece of terrain in the future. Now, this is going to be a long-term project. However, it's something that I do want to do one day. So, as I said, this piece is designed to go into the corner of the board. But what about if I make 3 more big corner pieces of terrain similar to this one, probably with a different design, so I can have all 4 corners filled with pieces of terrain, and if I'm very clever I can do it so I can fit all 4 corner pieces together in the middle of the board to make one massive like hill section in the middle of the board, and I can have different themes on each section. So I've got my acid pool on one, and then maybe I'd have one with sort of rocky ground, maybe one with some structures on, some buildings, etc. I think that would be really cool to have a massive section in the middle of my board, but it will be interchangeable so I can put all 4 pieces into the corners as well. Now, I know this is going to be a big project. I probably will have to build 1 corner at a time as a separate piece of terrain, but making sure that at the end I'll be able to fit all 4 corners together in one section. Now, if you like the sound of this piece of terrain, maybe you've got some ideas for it as well that you could throw in my direction, then let me know in the comments box below, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. This is definitely something that I want to do in the future. Now, my Necron Terrain, my inspiration for my Necron Terrain is from this old codex. This is my most favourite Necron codex. I love this. It was my first ever codex. And in the back are some great inspirational pieces of terrain and a terrain generator. In actual fact, I used this terrain generator to make my first pieces of terrain. There's 12 pieces in total. However, there's 2 pieces that I haven't made yet. Now, one of them isn't actually a Necron piece of terrain. It's an Adeptus Mechanicus research post. A small cluster of up to 4 prefabricated buildings and up to 12 of connecting light barricades inside the tomb. This may be the remains of a small camp representing a previous doomed attempt to penetrate the tomb's secrets. Now, I think that would be pretty cool to have an Adeptus Mechanicus piece of terrain on my tomb world. I think it would make for some great battle reports with a story behind them. So that is something that I want to do one day. Now, it says prefabricated buildings. Not quite sure what to use for that, whether I actually purchase some buildings of some description or if I scratch build them. But if you've got any ideas on that, I would be interested to hear them. Now, the other one which I haven't built yet is because there's actually no piece of terrain for it. It's more of a rule. So if you roll on the chart and you get this one, it's called a Sandstorm. It changes the rules of the game if you roll a 6. Now, bearing in mind, this is a 3rd edition codex, so the rules which they've listed here may not necessarily translate to 8th edition very well. However, I could adapt the rules and maybe come up with a piece of terrain to represent a sandstorm. Now, out of interest, this is the rules for sandstorms. Sandstorms are dangerous and frequent occurrences on the dead worlds favoured by the Necrons as locations for their tombs. Roll a d6 at the beginning of each player turn. On a 6, all movement that game turn counts as being over difficult terrain, and rolls of a 6 are required to hit with shooting attacks over 12 inches. Now I have played the Sandstorm Role in the past, but I have to be honest, I only played it once. It was Imperial Guard versus Necrons, and the Imperial Guard player, believe it or not, rolled a 6 3 turns in a row, making it almost impossible for him to shoot all of his big long-ranged guns. And to be fair, from that day my buddy would never play that special rule again, so we sort of disregarded it. However, I'm thinking now maybe we could adapt that special rule for 8th edition, and somehow if I could come up with a piece of terrain to represent a sandstorm. Now the original rules had 2 hinders if there was a sandstorm on. One was movement through difficult terrain. Well, we don't really have that now. You can move over terrain freely. And the other one was to shooting. So what I'm thinking is maybe I could make it so you have an advantage and a disadvantage if you happen to roll a 6 and get a sandstorm. So what I'm thinking, your advantage could be the cover side. So if there's a sandstorm on in your turn, then any of your units that end up in cover, that get a cover save, gets a +1 to your cover save. But your disadvantage is when you're shooting in your turn with a sandstorm, you're at -1 ballistic skill. So you've got an advantage and a disadvantage. Now I'd love to know what you think about that. Have you got any ideas of what you think a sandstorm rule could be? Now, how to represent the sandstorm on the table. I don't think you can use a piece of terrain that actually interferes with the game, so I'm thinking you'll probably just have to use a sort of marker type piece of terrain. So maybe some scatter pieces of terrain that you put down on the board just to represent that there is a sandstorm there. But I'm not really sure what that could be. Maybe I could use some cotton wool and spray it black and make it look like sand or wind is being swept up, something like that. Again, if you've got any ideas, I would love to hear them. So, I'm very interested to hear your ideas on 8th edition, my terrain, and if you think I need more terrain, and I'm very interested to hear what you think about my new terrain ideas. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, hit my icon at the end of the video so you can keep up to date with the wonders of Warhammer 40k. Beam me up!